From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons.
Donald Trump re-airs grievances in a speech after his felony conviction, which President Biden says reaffirmed that no one is above the law. We'll assess the ramifications for both of their campaigns with Larry Sabato of the University of Virginia Center for Politics.
Biden today also announcing a new Israeli ceasefire offer to Hamas, a three-phase plan including the withdrawal of Israeli forces in exchange for the release of hostages. Evelyn Farkas of the McCain Institute joins this hour with more.
And data this morning showing a cooling in the Fed's preferred gauge of inflation. We'll get reaction from Bernstein of the White House Council of Economic Advisors. Plus, we'll have a closer look at the economy of Spain with that country's economic minister, Carlos Cuerpo. Welcome to Friday, Kaylee. It has been a week, and today the story continued to evolve, of course, in the legal journey of Donald Trump with what was promised to be a news conference. Not a single question was asked, kind of a, as you put it earlier, re-airing of grievances. And Joe Biden has his first chance really to weigh in on this today.
And he certainly did so, speaking from the White House largely about the Middle East, but beginning his remarks in the state dining room with reference to what had happened in New York yesterday, the conviction of Donald Trump. Here was the president earlier today.
They found Donald Trump guilty on all 34 felony counts. Now he'll be given the opportunity, as he should, to appeal that decision just like everyone else has that opportunity. That's how the American system of justice works. And it's reckless, it's dangerous, it's irresponsible for anyone to say this was rigged just because they don't like the verdict.
The president from a short time ago, as you saw and heard live on Bloomberg TV and radio, as we now bring in our reporter roundtable with Bloomberg's Akayla, Gardner and Gregory Korte. It's great to see you both at the table after a week in which we have seen and heard a lot. Akayla, you cover the White House for a living. That was a carefully choreographed speech and a real decision by the Biden White House to address this in front of what was supposed to be and was, in fact, an announcement on a potential ceasefire in the Middle East. Is this kind of a new approach to Donald Trump's issues by talking about it out loud?
Yeah, this has been a careful orchestration by not only the White House, but also the Biden campaign. We have really seen them in the last couple days begin to engage more in this trial, more than we have seen them do before. We have seen time and time again from the podium, they say they do not comment on ongoing legal trials. Yeah. And yet we saw the campaign at the courthouse this week, and they're basically saying, for one, we know the media is covering this incessantly. We want a piece of that. But they're also saying that our message and core to Biden's reelection pitch is a threat to democracy. And that's exactly what you saw him do there, sort of undermine some of Trump's attacks against him, blaming him and Democrats for the legal trials against him.
Well, and certainly we saw Trump re-airing very similar rhetoric in regard to those accusations, even though they largely are false earlier today. But he also took the opportunity to take a bit of a victory lap about the fundraising his campaign has been able to do off the back of the jury's verdict yesterday. Here was him at the news conference earlier.
Last night, we just got a report this morning, in the history of politics, I believe, maybe I'm wrong, somebody will find that I'm wrong, maybe, but I don't think so. They raised with small money donors, meaning like $21, $42, $53, $38, a record $39 million in about a 10-hour period.
He said $39 million, Gregory. The campaign had said earlier today it was $34.8 million. Nonetheless, that's a lot of money in a very short period of time. Is that evidence that actually a guilty verdict only works to serve Donald Trump's campaign effort?
Yeah, we saw this time and again last year when we had those successive indictments. And every time he was indicted, two things happened. One is he got a little bit of a bump in the Republican primary polls, and also he raised a lot of money. And we had been talking about, I think we've talked about at this table, that fundraising machine had shown signs of slowing down. Those small dollar donors were getting donor fatigue. If you ever get on one of these political email lists, a fundraising list, or you get the text on your phone, they're incessant, and you can't keep giving and giving and giving. But something like this happens, it really energizes his supporters. And he needed this shot in the arm because he's been consistently trailing President Biden's fundraising month over month until just this past month. And Biden has a war chest twice as big as his. He needs to catch up in the fundraising, and this will certainly help.
Was it smart for this change in strategy for Joe Biden to front load an announcement on an Israeli ceasefire by talking about Donald Trump's legal problems?
Yeah, as Akayla said, he's getting a little bit more aggressive on that.
Yeah.
I kind of thought his remarks today were a little measured. It was less about Trump and more
Trump's
about
already
the
made an ad out of
integrity
it.
of the legal system that he feels is under attack by Trump. And Joe Biden is an institutionalist. He's worked in Washington for the last 50 years. He thinks the rule of law is important. That was sort of his official message from that White House podium. We'll see if it's a different message once he gets out on the campaign trail.
Well, and perhaps it isn't so much about the words the president actually said in regard to Trump's conviction, but what he didn't say when he was asked by one of the reporters in the room.
That's right.
How he felt about Trump's characterization of him being a political prisoner and Biden being at fault. And all he did was smile. And the Trump campaign has already seized on that and turned it into an ad that is circulating on social media. But to Joe's point, President Biden not only was addressing Donald Trump's conviction, but also today shared a new plan for a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas.
This is truly a decisive moment. Israel has made their proposal. Hamas says it wants a ceasefire. This deal is an opportunity to prove whether they really mean it. Hamas needs to take the deal.
And Akayla, this deal is a 3-phase plan that would begin with a temporary 6-week ceasefire. The thing is, the president said today Israel has offered it to Hamas through Qatar as an intermediary. Is Hamas likely to take it?
Yeah, it's hard to overstate how significant this deal could be because Biden laid out that this could have an enduring peace, and that's exactly what Hamas has wanted. They say they want a path to a permanent ceasefire to agree to anything. They have said publicly, at least, that they want Israel to stop fighting, period, before they negotiate. But we've been told by administration officials that they're more hopeful behind the scenes, that Hamas may be more open to this deal than they're signaling right now publicly in statements.
Well, that's really important reporting here. This would mean the return of hostages. This would also mean the release of Palestinian prisoners. If this actually happened the way Joe Biden outlined it today, and it's not lost on us that he was the one making the announcement as opposed to Israel, does that create a different feeling among progressive Democrats who have been very upset with him over his Israel policy?
And I think to your point, because this is a 3-phase plan, it is going to be very conditional. Each of those phases has to turn out the way that they want them to in order to reach this permanent ceasefire. But he made this big appeal. He said, everyone around the world who's been calling for this ceasefire, this is your moment to raise your voices. He is speaking to so many of those voters who are disgruntled by his handling and, frankly, an international community that's frustrated with Israel at this time.
Wow.
Well, and that domestic audience that he was speaking to, is it enough, Gregory, for them to just hear him talking about a ceasefire deal, or does realistically, politically, he need to see the ceasefire done permanently before November?
I see two parts to this foreign policy problem that the president has in terms of domestic policies. One is certainly there's a large number of largely young, largely progressive, multi-ethnic voters who are Democrats who would otherwise vote for Joe Biden, who think he's too close to the Netanyahu government. He's put his finger on the scale for Israel in this conflict. But the other problem is that he's just spending too much time on foreign policy in an era where we have high inflation. People are concerned about the economy. They're concerned about immigration. They're concerned about all these domestic issues. That it's a real problem. And I hear this even from the Biden campaign, that they understand that the president's got to get re-engaged on domestic issues, but it's hard to do that when he's still the commander-in-chief, and he's got to pay attention to what's going on in Israel. He's got to pay attention to what's going on in Ukraine, China, around the world.
All right, Bloomberg's Gregory, Korte, and Akayla Gardner also have a lot to pay attention to. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Coming up, we'll dive more into the political fallout for former President Trump and President Biden in light of Trump's conviction on 34 criminal felony counts with Larry Sabato of the University of Virginia Center for Politics. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
This is going to embolden the base of each party. What we saw yesterday was that Republicans on Capitol Hill had one of their most successful fundraising days in history. So this will be great from a fundraising perspective. It will be great in terms of emboldening the base.
That was Libby Cantrill, PIMCO's managing director of public policy, earlier today on Bloomberg, with her thoughts on how Donald Trump's criminal conviction may embolden Democrat and Republican bases. I'm Joe Matthew, alongside Kaylee Lyons in Washington. Thanks for being with us this evening on Bloomberg TV and radio. As we bring in Larry Sabato with the University of Virginia Center for Politics. Larry, it's great to see you. Welcome back to Bloomberg. I'm struggling here. Maybe you can help me out. But I keep hearing about how this is going to help Donald Trump potentially being the first former president to be a convicted felon. And I can only think of Saturday Night Live, back in the old days, John Lovitz as Michael Dukakis saying, "I can't believe I'm losing to this guy." Is this real?
Look, you can't judge based on whatever's happening at the end of May or even in June. Let's get past the conventions. Then polling gets serious. And I think political analysis gets serious, too, because right now it isn't. What happened with the convictions for Donald Trump will have short-term and long-term effects for both parties. I think your guest there just mentioned the fundraising advantage for Republicans, and they did raise, they claim at least, $35 million in less than 24 hours, which is an incredible total. That's the immediate effect. I don't know what Democrats have raised off of it, probably a lot less than that. But as we go on and as we see what happens and how people interpret these convictions and other legal actions that may happen between now and November, there may be a little less positive effect for Donald Trump. And Joe Biden will have his own effects.
Well, Larry, we all saw your initial reaction yesterday when the verdict came down. Hey, pollsters, all your polls just turned to dust. So clearly you think something ultimately will change because of this conviction. I just wonder your thoughts on how much it matters who it changes for. If this just refortifies the opinions of the bases of each party who already were decided if they were going to vote for Donald Trump or Joe Biden, what about those who were undecided? How many minds realistically could change here? How small is that basket?
4 to 6% true, hardcore undecided. And by undecided, I mean not just that they haven't decided between Biden and Trump. They haven't decided whether they will vote for a third party or independent candidate. Maybe they haven't even decided whether they're going to vote or not. There are lots of decisions to be made, and people gradually make them, accelerating, obviously, after both conventions. So that's the group we're talking about. It's not very big. It's smaller than usual, probably because they already know a great deal about Donald Trump and Joe Biden. They've had to consider that in 2020, and they've considered Donald Trump since 2015. So on the whole, I would say that right now it's benefiting Trump more than Biden. But polling is ephemeral, and so are the effects of major events. And we already know on the calendar, we've got a major debate coming earlier than ever before at the end of June. In July, Trump will have to make his vice presidential choice. He has, one assumes. The judge will give him his sentence right before the Republican convention in mid-July. Then you have the Democratic convention in late August. Then the formal kickoff to the campaign, which is supposed to be on Labor Day, and then a second debate shortly after that. So all of these are fixed events, and you've got a lot of things we don't know that are going to happen. Maybe a ceasefire, one hopes, in the Middle East, just to mention one.
Reminding us of the uncertainty, and I suspect that goes down ballot. Larry, I was really struck by the response and how quickly it came from Republican lawmakers. It was right at this time yesterday. This was all breaking loose. By 5:10, the Speaker of the House himself had a statement out on Donald Trump's verdict. Shameful charges, he said, an absurd verdict, a shameful day in American history, he called it. What could be the down ballot effect as we talk about potential benefits for Donald Trump, but for Republicans who are trying to ride the coattails of a convict?
Yeah, it's a dangerous place to be. And too many Republicans jumped too quickly, and I think rashly, in Donald Trump's direction. Now, one understands why any candidate for vice president might have said the things that they said right away. I can see why the Speaker of the House did it. I don't agree with what he said, but I can see why he said it. He's depending a great deal on Donald Trump to stay in office for the full term as Speaker. But it is a dangerous place to be, because with Donald Trump, every single day, he's going to say something controversial or something outrageous, or maybe do something controversial or outrageous. So they feel like they have to stick with him right now, but there are costs to doing that. Now, for Democrats, I suppose there are costs to sticking with Joe Biden, but they're not as large. They're not as great. The dangers are less because Joe Biden is less rash.
Larry, you just mentioned the idea that you understand why potentially people who want to be vice president would be louder on this than others. Does the fact that Donald Trump now has to campaign as a convicted felon make the other person on the ticket more important if there is now something of a crack in the Teflon armor?
I'm not sure vice presidents always matter all that much, but it would be useful to have someone on the Republican ticket who can project stability, who may have some independence, at least in their past, so that if the 78-year-old candidate, or 78 in 2 weeks, should falter, whether it's legally or in health, that person will have the confidence of the American people going forward. And of course, the same is true on the Democratic side with a candidate who will be 82 in November. I mean, these candidates are very old, and that does change the picture for the electorate. But, you always have to maintain in a party some distance between yourself and the presidential candidate, hoping that the coattail effect won't be as serious as sometimes it is. It can add 2 or 3 points or subtract 2 or 3 points from the people down ballot, House and Senate, governor, state legislature. Parties tend to rise and fall together anymore because we have such intense partisan identification. That's intensified over the past decade or so. Very difficult to avoid entanglement with the party's presidential nominee.
All right, Larry Sabato of the University of Virginia, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We appreciate your insight, and also go Hawks.
Thank you very much.
Coming up, European economies are preparing for the potential of a second Trump administration, despite yesterday's conviction. Up next, we'll have a conversation with Spain's economy minister, Carlos Cuerpo. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
We're going to make America great again. We're going to make it better than ever before. November 5th, remember, November 5th is the most important day in the history of our country.
That was Donald Trump earlier today, teasing ahead to an election that won't just be important for the United States, but for other countries as well, as they consider the potential policies a second Trump administration could bring. Joining us now for more is Spain's economy minister, Carlos Cuerpo, who is here with us in our Washington, D.C. studios. Thank you so much for joining us here on Bloomberg TV and radio. We heard former President Trump there talk about Make America Great Again. Often he also says America first. And what we have seen that bring is more isolationist and protectionist policies. How do you prepare for that? How does Spain prepare for that, and Europe more broadly?
Well, it's a pleasure being here. Thanks a lot for inviting me. I think what we're really seeing now in Europe is we're taking conscience of these geopolitical context outside of the EU, this race for competitiveness, and we're getting ready for it. That would be my quick answer.
You're getting ready for it. Well, Donald Trump and Joe Biden have something in common, apparently, and that's tariffs. As the president promises a significant increase on tariffs against China, should he be reelected, I presume that's something we could see. Donald Trump is talking about across-the-board tariffs on a number of things. What would it mean for the EU? What would it mean for Spain?
Well, from the EU, what we need to do is, I think, to balance our bet for open trade and for a rules-based multilateral system. But at the same time, we need to keep on pushing for our economic security agenda. And in a sense, I think this would put on the table something which is very clear for us now, is that we need to be open for foreign investment, and at the same time we need to protect our companies and ensure that that they're treated fairly, both within and outside the EU. So let's not be naive also in terms of doing the proper screening of those foreign direct investments to Spain, but also to the EU.
Well, something the EU has an active review ongoing, and we could see preliminarily announced next week, is tariff decisions on Chinese-made electric vehicles. There are Chinese companies with factories in Spain who are trying to make electric vehicles in your country. How do you view specifically the Chinese EV tariff question?
Well, as I said before, in a sense, there are big competitors outside, which are also somehow providing us with key inputs into the value chains of those very important industries. So we need to keep this balance between being an attractor of investment, but also protecting our strategic companies within key industries. And of course, EV industry is one of the key elements going forward in terms of keeping our economies into the right track in terms of decarbonization as well.
Our markets today are celebrating the latest reading on inflation, which has been dogging this president and our economy since we came out of COVID. I wonder your thoughts on the trajectory of inflation in Spain and the EU, as the president says that we're better off when it comes to high prices than the rest of the world. Is he right?
Well, what we're seeing in the EU, in the euro area, and in Spain as well, I think it's a long-term trend of moderation in inflation. In mid-22, we were in a two-digit phase in terms of inflation, but this is going down. And what the ECB and the Bank of Spain expect for the euro area and Spain is this magic 2% figure for 2025. And we're getting there gradually. And this is what is also allowing the analysts to expect also some cuts in terms of interest rates from the ECB in the next meeting.
Well, interest rate cuts usually come either because inflation is going down or because something is getting damaged within the economy. It's weakening, therefore you need to ease policy. Do you expect we'll see any weakness in GDP? What are your forecasts for growth this quarter?
Well, the Spanish economy is actually behaving rather robustly. When you look at our growth performance, not only in 23, but also in this beginning of 24, we're outperforming our main peers. And this is also, I think, reflected in the outlook from the main institutions, be it the IMF or the European Commission or even the OECD. What they expect is Spain to grow above our main peers, which is France, Germany or Italy, around 2%, both in 24 and 25. And which is more, when we think about our growth pattern, is that it's a balanced growth pattern because it includes, as we said just before, a moderation of inflation and also a key element, which is fiscal responsibility. And this package actually is what will allow us also to keep growing in the midterm.
There's some uncertainty over whether Spain will have a new central bank governor by the 10th of June. What's going to happen?
Well, we will have a new central bank governor because the current governor's term is ending, as you said, on the 11th of June. Somehow it's not a hard deadline. We have the vice governor who can actually take his place in an interim way while we decide on the new figure. But for sure, I think the person who will come after Pablo, who's been an excellent governor, will keep up to the standards.
But isn't this a little bit of a delicate moment to have uncertainty as to who's helming the Spanish central bank when you were just talking about the idea that the ECB could be about to start cutting rates? We could be entering a new cycle within monetary policy. Is this really the moment to have uncertainty around that?
Well, it's the normal process. We have to replace the current governor, so we will do it in due time. And I think the fact that we follow the current process will not imply anything in terms of our clout and the impact that the new governor will have in the decisions of the Governing Council of the ECB.
You referred to the magic number of 2%. We hear a lot about that magic number here as well. If it requires magic, do we need a different number?
Well, magic maybe in our imagination, as we were somehow very far away from it during the pre-COVID period, where it appeared really impossible to catch up from below. And now we're getting there from above. But I think maybe this soft landing prophecy that we are seeing now, which is apparently becoming true, is leading us towards this magic number.
Carlos Cuerpo, we thank you for coming to see us today at Bloomberg. Safe travels getting home. Spain's economy minister with us live on Balance of Power. As we turn our attention to the U.S. economy, with today April data that we just referred to on one of the Fed's main gauges for inflation, the preferred gauge, as we hear, PCE, up 0.2%, the smallest gain of the year. With us now from the White House North Lawn is the chairman of the White House Council of Economic Advisors, Jared Bernstein. Mr. Chairman, welcome back. This is getting exhausting, isn't it? Every time we talk, it's a different wrinkle on this, whether we're moving up a smidge or moving down a smidge. There's been concern about a reacceleration of inflation, and then we get a number like this and the markets celebrate. Are we back to soft landing talk?
Well, I think for many of us, we didn't leave that forecast too far. I think the consensus among many was that the kind of stall in disinflation in Q1 of this year looked like it was probably anomalous factors, some residual seasonality, and that the prints for April, whether it's CPI or PCE, have been more on track, as you just said. That's very welcome news, but it's just 1 month. So both we and certainly central banks, including the one you were just talking with, need more confidence in that forecast. But the forces of disinflation that helped us so much in the second half of this year, I think they're still in place.
Well, it becomes a question, Mr. Chairman, of what needs to happen for that disinflation to continue. The fact that we got cooler data today, coupled with a slowdown in consumer spending, is that actually a sign that further progress on inflation is going to have to mean a weaker U.S. consumer?
Well, it's really an important point because obviously so far what we call the sacrifice ratio, meaning how much demand we've had to give up to sacrifice to get the disinflation we've seen, has been about zero. We've had, I looked this morning at the report, 4.4 percentage points of disinflation in the PCE, while the unemployment rate is virtually unchanged, below 4% for over 2 years, and consumer spending is actually up over that period. So, you know, that tells you that much of the progress has been made on the economy supply side. It looks to me like the demand side is still quite intact, where we have a solid labor market supporting consumer spending. But I take your point regarding April. One thing I'll say about that, which I think has been somewhat underappreciated today, if you simply plot out real consumer spending, it's been growing above trend for a while. It came up a little bit in your conversation about the U.S. as a strong growth outlier that you had with the Spanish economic minister. The fact that we've been consistently above trend means we have a little wiggle room there, and so I'm confident that we should be able to continue to push ahead.
The sacrifice ratio sounds like a prog rock band, Jared. Where will the sacrifice ratio be when we hit 2%?
Well, it's just about one of the most important numbers one can talk about right now, because lots of economists assured us that the only way to get this much disinflation that we've seen would be through much higher unemployment, much more demand destruction, in the spirit of the question you just asked me. Thus far, that hasn't been the case, and that's certainly been the president's goal. His instructions to his economics team is we're not going to get inflation back to where it needs to be on the backs of working people. We need to maintain a job market that's generating real wage gains. And that's, of course, what we've been seeing now for well over a year, wages beating prices. That helps to feed back into consumer spending, and it's one of the reasons why this recovery, this expansion, has been continuously and I think reliably quite strong.
Well, you talk about wage data, Jared. We'll get more of it next Friday when we get the jobs report. Right now, the non-farm payrolls estimate is 190,000. You're on with us frequently on Jobs Day talking about a labor market that is returning more towards normal, towards trend. Perhaps that kind of figure wouldn't scare you. But is there a number that would frighten you, that something is starting to break? Where do jobs need to come in for you to still feel comfortable with this labor market?
So the number that comes to mind when we're trying to contemplate that question is the break-even rate or break-even number. And that's the number of jobs that you need to keep the unemployment rate from rising given the labor force. Now, we've had some really nice results in the labor force. Again, this is a statistic that's historical and I think somewhat underappreciated. We have women's labor force participation and employment rate, both of those important kind of demand side indicators, at their historically highest level they've been since these data began to be tracked in 1948. As the labor force has expanded, we've been able to have higher break-even numbers, so we can get numbers that are 190, 200, north of 200, and see unemployment kind of hold steady. That suggests the break-even rate is a little higher than folks thought. So look, I think the key point here, kind of wrapping a lot of what we've been talking together, especially on the inflation side, is that it looks to me like supply and demand are much better aligned in the labor market. And that alignment has not come through job loss. So we haven't seen unemployment go up very much. It's come through lower vacancies. Vacancies have come down. And that's a great way to, if you have to align supply and demand in the labor market, that's the way you want to do it because it doesn't fall on the backs of working people.
A week from today, Jared, we'll be talking about the latest jobs report. Will that data confirm some of the ideas that we're talking about?
Well, look, I mean, forecasting the jobs report even a week out is a very tough thing to do. I guess the way I would phrase it, and consistent with our conversation so far, is we have an economy that has some, I think, quite positive momentum. Yes, we've seen some slowing, whether it's GDP, whether it's the number of job growth, but that slowing is down to rates that I would call more steady, more stable, as the economy just normalizes after coming out of the pandemic. In a 70% consumer spending economy, if you have a really healthy labor market, which ours has been for over 2 years, and you have inflation coming down at a decent clip this morning, inflation down 60% off of its peak, that translates into real earnings, feeds back into consumer spending. And, you know, let's take a close shave with Occam's razor, if we will, and just kind of call that a healthy, kind of perpetual motion economy that's been reliably delivering for working households for a while now. Now, look, I want to be clear. We've got a lot more work to do on the price side. Prices are still too high, and we have an aggressive cost-cutting agenda that we're going to continue to push. But the macroeconomy has been delivering solid numbers.
All right, Jared Bernstein joining us from the White House North Lawn, of course, chair of the White House Council of Economic Advisors. Thank you so much for your time, sir. We appreciate it. Now, coming up, we'll examine another announcement we got from the White House today, a newly announced three-phase ceasefire deal proposal between Israel and Hamas. Evelyn Farkas, executive director of the McCain Institute, will be with us next. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio.
For months, people all over the world have called for ceasefire. Now it's time to raise your voices and demand that Hamas come to the table, agrees to this deal, and end this war that they began.
President Biden earlier at the White House, as you saw and heard live here on Bloomberg TV and Radio. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons in Washington. Thanks for joining us on Balance of Power. As we add the voice of Evelyn Farkas to dig into this a bit more, she's executive director of the McCain Institute and former deputy assistant secretary of state for Russia and Ukraine. And I'd like to get to Ukraine, Evelyn, but welcome back. In terms of what we heard today, I'd love to know first what you think of the timing and the fact that it was Joe Biden who made this announcement and not Israel.
Right. I mean, well, the timing comes on the heel of incredible international pressure, Joe, on Israel to halt this offensive in Rafah. The pressures coming from the International Criminal Court, where, of course, Israel is not a member, but still, you know, there is some weight there coming from that high court. On top of that, our administration, the U.S. administration, the Biden administration, has been putting pressure on Israel also publicly to halt the effort in Rafah and declaring a red line that we wouldn't provide any assistance to Ukraine that would be in Rafah proper. So I think the president felt like he had to do something. He may have been worried that the Israelis were not going to actually take the ceasefire or propose the ceasefire to Hamas. And so he was trying to get out ahead of them. Or maybe this is actually helpful to Netanyahu to have the U.S. government come out first and propose it publicly.
Well, it becomes a question of incentives, Evelyn. After just a few days ago, earlier this week, we were hearing Israeli officials say it was going to take them another 7 months to finish the job with Hamas. What incentive does Israel have to make this offer? And what incentive does Hamas have to accept it?
Well, there is a great incentive, as I mentioned, on the side of Israel because they're really losing the public relations campaign, if you will. Public pressure on them is intense, including from the United States, their number one ally globally. And the reality is that the Israeli government, they have internal pressures as well. The families of the hostages want to have their family members home. The Israeli people, of course, are being called up. The longer this goes on, it's been 8 months, the more resistance there will be probably economically from business leaders, et cetera, especially if Israel doesn't seem to be making progress on achieving their stated objectives, which are getting the hostages home and destroying Hamas. The pressure on Hamas is obvious. It's physical. You know, the Israelis, in going into Rafah and closing that Rafah crossing, they have essentially made it harder for Hamas to smuggle materials. According to the Israelis, that was an area where they were smuggling materials into Hamas fighters. So there's increased physical pressure on them. There probably have been attacks successfully. We're reading a little bit about that in the media. But I think, Kelly, the overall problem for most of us watching this is that we're not really sure how much progress Israel's making. We don't know what the strategy is, so we can't measure even any progress that they tell us about against a strategy. And so it just looks like there's a lot of human suffering, and it's been going on for too long. And so the pressure on both sides has mounted, and hopefully this means this ceasefire agreement will actually hold.
Well, Evelyn, it seems that Joe Biden has had an evolution once again when it comes to Ukraine. And I'd love your thoughts on news from the White House now that the U.S. will allow Ukraine to launch U.S.-provided munitions against military targets in Russia. This idea of taking the fight to Russia was seen as escalatory. It's limited in scope, though. This will only be around Kharkiv, where obviously we've seen intense fighting and some trouble for Ukraine. Is it the right move now? Should it cover the entire country? What are you making of this?
Joe, I'm going to sound like John McCain. It's the right move, you know, a year ago, years ago. And so I'm saying it's overdue. And the other thing is that we keep drawing these red lines. I mean, Russia has drawn some red lines, and they threaten nuclear means all the time, you know, some kind of nuclear retaliation. But the reality is that the red lines that we hear about, you know, we don't want to give this weapon system or that weapon system, don't use the weapon system inside Russian territory, don't use the weapon system in occupied Crimea. All these lines have been drawn, frankly, by us because we're so afraid of escalation. So I'm happy to see that the Biden administration made this decision, but frankly, it's long overdue. People have been losing their lives, and Ukraine is in danger of losing that city if they aren't able to take action very soon.
But Evelyn, that fear of escalation you speak of, is that not warranted? Does the risk of escalation move higher as a result of this decision?
I don't think, Kelly, it does move higher as a result of this decision. You're right that there is always some danger of escalation, and the reward of taking on the risk has to be balanced against the potential escalation. But in this case, I think we all understood, those of us who have watched Vladimir Putin, that he wasn't going to use a nuclear weapon because the weapons we were already providing to Ukraine would now be allowed to target military assets inside of Russia proper. The Ukrainians have already been hitting refineries and other targets using their own munitions, and that didn't cause the Russians to lose their minds and use nuclear weapons. So I think the nuclear threshold is still pretty high in Moscow. And of course, you can never rule anything out, but I don't think that Vladimir Putin is suicidal.
All right, Evelyn Farkas of the McCain Institute. Always great to get your insights. Thank you so much for joining us. Coming up, we'll turn back to former President Trump raising over $34 million, not even 24 hours after a Manhattan jury delivered a guilty verdict on 34 counts in his hush money trial. We'll be joined by our political panel, our closers, Rick and Jeanne, next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Mr. President, can you tell us, sir, Donald Trump refers to himself as a political prisoner and blames you directly. What's your response to that, sir? Do you think the conviction will have an impact on the campaign? We'd love to hear your thoughts, sir.
Should he be on the ballot, sir?
That was President Biden earlier today, not verbally responding to questions around Donald Trump's conviction, but delivering a smile that the Trump campaign has already turned into an advertisement. Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Joining us now is our political panel, our closers, as it is Friday, Rick Davis of Stonecourt Capital and Jeanne Zaino, political science professor at Iona University and senior democracy fellow with the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. Jeanne, it of course is not just any Friday. This is the day after the former president and presumptive Republican nominee became a convicted felon. Joe Biden made the decision today to address it with remarks that you and Rick told us earlier in the day when it was happening in real time were measured and appropriate. Did the smile ruin it all?
You know, I don't think so. I thought the president's remarks were clear. I thought they were measured. And I think it's something that they should keep saying, which is the fact that this is a jury of his peers, 12 people. We need to respect the jury. And we need to remember that in the U.S., nobody is above the law. But, I'm looking at how the Trump campaign and all of his acolytes are responding. They are monitoring every response that comes out. When Larry Hogan says, we should respect the rule of law in the process, Chris Lasavita, Trump's campaign manager, says, that's the end of your campaign. The college Republicans came out and said something very benign about respecting the jury after they said that the verdict was not sound. And he, once again, in the middle of the night, Chris Lasavita said, you are a bunch of a-holes. So this is what the Trump campaign is doing. Anybody who steps out of line is being policed by this group. And I think that is something that the Biden campaign expects. And they are going to just keep going out there and saying the same thing. This is the rule of law, and we have to respect it.
Wow, Jeanne, aren't you glad you came back, Rick? How are we going to handle this here? I wonder your thoughts.
Tough to follow that
Well,
up.
I don't know how you're going to follow that. But Joe Biden's been criticized for always taking that last question, that deadly last question when you say something you regret. Today was a smile. And to Kaylee's point, it's already an advertisement. What did you make of the body language there? Was that a problem for him going forward?
I think that's Dark Brandon talking to us. If he'd have just put the aviators on, that would have been an ad. No, look, I don't get it. I think it's his measured comments were fine as President of the United States talking about a foreign policy issue. But why? Where's the campaign? Where are the 25 surrogates that are supposed to be hitting all these outlets, including ours, talking about how the rule of law needs to be respected? And this guy has been undermining the rule of law and talking about this really unhinged speech that he gave at Trump Tower today, and how he's not capable of serving as a commander in chief if he can't even give a response to an attack, an outcome like this with the jury. I mean, I don't get it. So we're now ceding to Chris Lasavita the entire spin on a first time a former president has ever been convicted of a felony. Wow. I don't get it.
Well, you could say that it's spin, except that he's raising real dollars off of this, Rick. He talked about this in the press conference earlier today. The campaign says $34.8 million from small dollar donors. That's real.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, spin is real, too, if you win the spin game.
Sure.
Look, he's had trouble with his low-dollar fundraising lately. It's tailed off, and, this put a shot in the arm. But let's not confuse that with winning an election, right? Money is not votes. And so, the big change that's happening within the Trump campaign is they're now focused on votes. They've been focused on money for the last few months, and they'll be fine. They'll compete with plenty of capital, and there are indications that they're making progress with large donors who are giving to the super PACs. But at the end of the day, this is about the 1 or 2% that may tail off of his coalition because of a conviction, and they're out there hustling it and painting a totally different picture of the outcome of this case. They're out there creating their own facts. And there doesn't seem to be any response either by the prosecutor's office in New York or the Democratic Party or the campaign to say, no, this is the facts of the case. The end of the day, in our rule of law, Jurors have the last say of what a fact is, and they've convicted him on 34 counts. That's amazing.
Well, we're talking about the president's smile and what he said at the beginning today about the trial, not so much about what the whole purpose of the president's speech was, Jeanne, to announce a potential ceasefire, a proposal from Israel that we now are hearing about. AFP reporting that Hamas says it, quote, considers positively, unquote, this roadmap towards a full ceasefire. We've talked a lot about outrage and disappointment by progressive Democrats that have made Joe Biden's road to the White House even bumpier here. Would this ceasefire change that?
I think it would in the end. And I think that if they are able to achieve this, the most important thing is we get those hostages out. And of course, we are able to bring relief to the people who are on the Gaza Strip. So, those are the most important things. Politically, it would be good for Joe Biden. It would put some of this to rest. But the reality is that as we think about this, we haven't seen the numbers yet in the polls which show that if we don't achieve a ceasefire, that this would indeed make it really, really difficult for Joe Biden. It doesn't help him, but we haven't seen the numbers yet that the Democrats who are in the progressive wing will go somewhere else or will definitely stay home. But to your point, it is a positive thing. And by the way, I just want to add, I don't see the problem with a smile. So I think the Democrats should troll the Trump campaign right back. But that's just me.
Well, we'll see how much President Biden is smiling on Monday, Rick, when his son begins his trial on federal gun charges. Hunter Biden will be in court in Delaware. For all the attention we gave the trial of Donald Trump, how much negative attention could that trial give the incumbent president?
Yeah, I certainly think it's a distraction for the president and his campaign. Nobody wants to have their son prosecuted, but that's a distinctly different and much lower threshold problem than what we just witnessed for the last 6 weeks, taking place in New York in a courtroom. So I think that it is likely a manageable issue. And I'm not sure the Republicans in the Donald Trump campaign really want to spend that much investment on Hunter Biden. It's been so prosecuted so far, in Congress. The Republicans have launched investigations. And nothing has really stuck. Nothing has really gained any kind of political traction. And so I'm sure the folks in Mar-a-Lago are looking at this going, yes, it's definitely something we want to talk about, but no, I don't think it's going to make a material difference in the outcome of the election.
Interesting. We'll see what Jim Jordan, Jim Comer have to say about that when lawmakers return next week as well. It's going to be interesting around here. Rick Davis will be with us, and so will Jeanne Zaino, our signature political panel and our closers today on this Friday. Great to have you both, and I hope you both have a great weekend. Check out the Washington Edition newsletter over your weekend. I've got some good reading for you on the terminal and online.
And enjoy the weekend. Even though it was a short week, it has certainly been a doozy, and we saw history made. So thank you for joining us and taking part in it. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.